So I looked at this study, and by the way, the study was done involving communities of 10,000 or less, with one or two exceptions that were a little bit larger. So some of the towns were very tiny, but for the most part, they were what Mesquite was just a couple of years ago. Again, we haven't had this population for long if you're fairly new here. Out of this, I'm going to talk about, and fairly briefly, I'm not going to go into details, 7 lessons that were learned by the researchers at the University of North Carolina as they scoured America for ideas in small towns. These are the ideas that they came up with, and I want to repeat them to you slowly. In small towns, community development and economic development. They're one and the same. You have community development, then you have economic development. I'll break that down a little bit. Communities that take a comprehensive approach to community economic development, and that's one that includes economic and broader long-term community development goals, stand to gain more than small towns that take a piecemeal approach. By viewing redevelopment in a more comprehensive way, and by including community development, considerations such as revitalization of blighted areas in its strategy, the town, and this town I'm talking about here is Selma, North Carolina, much smaller than Mesquite, but they were able to identify a barrier. And that barrier was they were redeveloping one side of the town, they were redeveloping the other side of the town, and they left the middle alone because they said there's nothing here for us. And then also, they found out that successful small towns tend to balance their short-term economic gains with long-term community development goals. The second lesson learned is that small towns with the most dramatic outcomes tend to be proactive and future-oriented. They embrace change and they assume risk. And that brought to mind a couple of things that occurred not too many years after I moved to Mesquite. And one was when somebody pointed out to me, well, that building over there was the Mesquite Star, and it's been vacant for the last, at that time, 3 years. And it never dawned on me at that time why it wasn't in business any longer. And then in recent years, the Oasis Hotel, which went out of business and casino, we lost a lot of employees, and a number of the people that were there then moved out of our city. And I thought to myself, maybe if we'd have been more proactive as a community, we might have saved these businesses at that time. But all I remember reading is in the paper is they're gone. And that was it, end of the story. Okay, getting them back is not an easy task. I used cases from Chillicothe, Missouri, Douglas, Georgia, and a little town called Farmville, North Carolina. They demonstrated that taking a proactive approach includes reaching out to existing industries. I'm not sure if we do that. I don't know if we've ever gone up to some of our companies that are here. As an example, Primex. Now, they've survived through the recession. But have we gone in there and asked them directly, what can we do as a community, as a city, to assure that you're going to be here next year, in 5 years, and in 10 years? We need to do this. Finally, most of the communities profiled in this collection demonstrate a willingness to embrace change and assume risk. I've heard a lot of people over the years say, well, you know, it's okay here. Things are just fine. Leave them alone. And I thought, you know what? We're missing the boat because change is coming whether we like it or not. The third item is successful community economic development strategies are guided by a broadly held local vision. So I thought, okay, I'll find out a little bit more about that. And I went to an item that was written, you have to forgive my notes because I have stuff all over the place. And this came from the state of Wyoming. And their questions were, basically, we should be looking at, where are we now? What and where do we want to be? Why aren't we there now? What needs to be done to get us there? Who's going to get us there? When is it going to be done? And how do we know when we get there? And that's some of the things that I think we need to do in Mesquite to develop our community economic analysis. analysis. Just as a back to that, Vicki mentioned that I was in business in California. I got tired of teaching school. I was doing that. I was running a special education program in a major high school year after year, and I kept telling myself, you know, every year I'm getting older and the kids stay the same age because they rotate through you over the years. I want to do something different with my life, at least for a while. And I did a very informal analysis. I call it, in economics, it's called a gap analysis, or leakage. I wanted to find out, what could I do to make a good living in a business that, number one, wasn't already there, and that people in the area were going elsewhere to spend their money. So I started surveying parts of the city, and this is Los Angeles, and if you know anything about Los Angeles, it's gigantic. I picked the area of Van Nuys, California, particularly because it was near two major freeways. There's a tremendous number of vehicles going through there every day, and I was interested in automobiles. I actually surveyed the neighborhood to start with, asking people where they get their cars serviced, and found out most of them were driving a pretty good distance for the service that I was going to provide. And you know, in Los Angeles, everybody drives, but nobody likes to. It's a traffic nightmare in that place. So I did that. Then I stood on where I thought I would build a business and counted cars day after day. And my wife said, "Are you out of your mind? You're standing on a corner with a clipboard." I said, "That's right, I'm marking down what goes by hour after hour and making a car count." And saying, "You know what? Those cars aren't stopping in this area, they're going elsewhere. This is the perfect spot to open up a business." And I did. I took my savings and some other funds, I wrote a business plan, and then went to a bank with my business plan and talked about a little bridge loan to get us rolling, which we did. I started with 2 employees. In 10 years, I had 9 full-time employees, and I thought at that point, well, it's time to go to the beaches of Maui, and I did, and sold the company. I also got bored after a couple of years and decided to step back to my old life again, and then went into my practice until I decided I was tired and it was time to move to, of all places, Mesquite, Nevada. And I love this town. It's got so much to offer. Okay. So back to and I did assume that risk, and I took a tremendous change. People said to me, "You're leaving education, you get a guaranteed check every single month. You don't even have to show up, you get a check." I said, "Well, you know what? I need a change, and there is no risk in what I'm doing," and that's when I look forward to the risk and the challenge. Excuse me just a moment. Okay. The other thing we need to do, the 4th of the 7 lessons, is define our assets and opportunities broadly, and we can yield innovative strategies that then capitalize on what have we got to offer in Mesquite. Okay. In almost any setting, urban or rural, large or small, shell buildings, low tax rates, limited regulation, access to trained workers, highways, railroads, or professional services might all be just considered economic development assets. And we have to look at every one of these and see the assets we've got, I believe, and what will fit for Mesquite.